week 2 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire this week. The first receiver, Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts, available 99% of fantasy leagues. So he was the deep ball threat in week 1 for this Colt team in a tough loss in a high-scoring game versus the Houston Texans. 3 catches, 125 receiving yards, and a touchdown on only 3 targets. I know it's a little bit fluky, but like I said, Anthony Richardson, he has a big arm. Alec Pierce could stretch the field, and he was a highly touted draft pick a few years ago by this Colt team. And another thing, Josh Downs was out in this game, but Adonai Mitchell, he didn't really do much. I think Alec Pierce is a deep ball threat and someone at minimum is going to work in 3 receiver sets for this Indianapolis Colts team. Definitely someone with upside. We've seen some big plays out of him over the last couple of years, but I think now with finally Richardson healthy and driving that football down the field, Alec Pierce could be a big-time deep ball threat for this Indianapolis Colts team. And coming off 125 yards and a touchdown in that Week 1 victory, he's definitely a wide receiver to go out there and get this week. The next receiver, Greg Dortch of the Arizona Cardinals. So this Cardinal team really don't have a number 2 wide receiver coming in, with Zay Jones suspended the next few weeks before he returns. Michael Wilson get a touchdown in this game. But Greg Dortch, we know he's been a PPR magnet the last few seasons when he actually gets some playing time. So week 1, in a tough loss in a ball game they blew at the Buffalo Bills, 6 catches, 47 receiving yards on 8 targets. So Trey McBride, he didn't do much in week 1. Marvin Harrison was non-existent. And Greg Dortch, he made some plays underneath. And like I said, he's a good route runner. He's got good hands. And when he's at extended play over the last few seasons, he's put up some decent PPR numbers. So right now, while he's available in 95% of fantasy leagues, and the slot receiver over there in Arizona and getting easy targets from Kyler Murray, where they have a good rapport, he's definitely someone I would add this week. The next receiver, Brandin Cooks of the Dallas Cowboys. So Brandin Cooks, I still believe his best years are behind him, and he's not going to be a week in and week out consistent option for the Cowboys or fantasy owners. But he came off a pretty decent week 1 performance at a good Cleveland Brown defense, even though the Cowboys went in there and they took care of business easily, 33-17 winning the game. So Cooks, 4 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown on 7 targets. And I know he left the field a little bit for that ball game, but he returned. And he's still the number 2 wide receiver over there in Dallas. And now with Jake Ferguson, we don't know the extent of his knee injury, but he came off the field in the third quarter holding the knee, where more targets could go Cook's way, where Ferguson last season was number 2 on the Cowboy team in receptions behind CeeDee Lamb. So Brandin Cooks, like I said, the best years are behind him, but he's in a pretty high-powered offense. There's going to be some weeks he'll put up numbers. And right now, as a veteran receiver, back in with the 5th receiver on your roster, I think it's an okay Ed. Nothing great, not a high ceiling, but right now he's available in 68% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver is Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. So the Giants got blown out in week 1 at home, 28-6 in the hands of the Minnesota Vikings. And Wan'Dale Robinson, pretty touted prospect the last couple seasons for the Giants, but he's available 90% of fantasy leagues, and he was a target machine in the blowout loss. 12 targets versus Vikings, 6 catches, 44 yards, a rush attempt for 14 yards. So he's a quick wide receiver, no doubt about it. He's got to learn the route tree. And obviously Daniel Jones, we know is not a good quarterback. And the only thing with Wan'Dale, he's an undersized wide receiver, but I think playing in the slot, and they can use him in different ways. In week 1, they definitely got blown out. But I think week 2, they could play a little bit better as this New York Giant team at the Commanders, where their defense couldn't stop the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 1, where that game could go either way, where it could be high scoring in week 2 at the Commanders, or it could be a low scoring. But Wan'Dale Robinson, number 2 receiver, it looks like Darius Slayton didn't do much. He's got speed, and they used him in different formations as well. So right now, while he's out there 90% of fantasy leagues, and this Giant team, I expect they're going to be trailing most ball games the majority of the season. He's a receiver there this week, and the 5th and final wide receiver I looked at off the wires, Ray McCloud of the Atlanta Falcons. So it was a horrible ball game offensively for Kirk Cousins and this Atlanta Falcon team to kick off the season. Ray McCloud, it looked like he was number 2 wide receiver. I know Darnell Mooney's over there, but he didn't do much. 15 yards. And McCloud, he's been more of a special teams player throughout his NFL career, but he went out there in week 1, he had a decent performance, 4 catches, 52 yards on 7 targets. So McCloud, he was the top receiver in week 1. Drake London didn't do anything, 2 catches, 15 yards. And like I said, Darnell Mooney only had the 1 catch. So McCloud, he'll be in there, 3 receiver sets, worst case for this Atlanta Falcon team. But McCloud, veteran, he had never had fantasy value, but with a quarterback like Kirk Cousins who spreads the football out, I think in deeper leagues he could be an ad available 98% of fantasy leagues. That's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire for week 2 of the fantasy football season.